By default.
By default.
But there is an enormous, and I always say this in Ireland, enormous opportunity to fix your own house when you have a bond market. Means that you can actually raise your own money, when you raise your own flag, when you actually become what I would call a normal adult country. I've always thought a country without a bond market isn't an adult country, because you're, as you said, you're waiting for transfers from the rest of the UK. What could you see done in Scotland? Because we're talking around Brexit, but this is more interesting than no deal or this deal Brexit.
Yeah.
What could you see doing in Scotland that would bring it away from the renter economy and create something else?
Great question. There's a lot of possibilities. The one thing it won't be is oil. The advantage that you do have is you've got a small economy with a relatively small population. It rains all the time. That's a pretty good one. You know why? Because the south of England is running out of water. So you can put pipelines straight down there and do that. But these are fanciful schemes. I mean, ultimately, what is it you need to do? The big thing is, of course, the currency question. You're absolutely right. It's currency, bond market, debt, being a grown-up country. How do you get there? Well, if you're an MMT fan, it's dead easy. You just print a new thing called the Mick Kilt, and you stuff it in the banks, and everything will be fine the next day. I think you can get away with that sort of stuff if you're the United States, and you've got the global reserve asset, and everybody else basically has to hold it and deal with it. If you're a small economy, Ireland's a good example of this. How come you guys ended up joining the euro? Because it was horrible trying to manage that exchange rate all the time when you're a small open economy, all right? Tiny little moves in the world economy can blow your currency up and down. And if you're heavily dependent on imports and exports, that's a screaming nightmare. So the current account constraint, as economists call it, is a really big deal for small open economies. So what does Scotland do? It's going to have to use the pound for a transitional stage. But then it should be completely open about from day one, this is transitional. This is perhaps a 3-year period. You give everybody as investors a chance to adjust their expectations, look at the books, look at the assets, look at the liabilities. And then you say, we're going to get our own currency and we're going to phase it in 3 years. How are we going to do that? We're going to float some debt. We're going to try it, see what interest rate we'd have to pay if we did this. And in the current environment, when basically any OECD country can borrow 10 to 15 years at a negative real rate, it shouldn't be that much of a big deal. So this is essentially, how do you phase a transition in such a way that you don't get capital flight out of the country and you maintain investor confidence and you create a positive buzz about the place so people actually want to invest in it and want to stay there. It's not that difficult to imagine how to do that.
No, and the other thing, what I've looked at, if you look at Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, what you see, and I put the north of England and large swathes of the middle of England in this, what you basically see is the progressive emasculation of the innovative power of these regions, because nobody's had to do it. They haven't even had to figure out, what sort of tax regime do we have? How do we get investment in?
Totally.
But once you actually put that constraint in front of people, it can actually be very energizing, because you can do stuff yourselves.
We were talking about this earlier, so I don't know if it was captured before we started recording, but the whole country lives off the dole generated by London. And, technically what you're looking at is like, GDP, right, gross domestic product. The underlying component that's called GVA, gross value added, right? Which bit adds value so you can flog it further down the chain, right? It used to be that outside of London, there was a wee bit around Manchester, and there was Scotland, was what's called GVA positive. For the past decade, it's been London and nothing else. The rest of the country literally lives off transfers. It's kind of like the world's worst universal basic income experiment. Because
I agree with you completely.
Obligations, and it's shit, and you don't have any real autonomy, and you can't do anything with it, but there you go, that's that. Why would anybody want to stay in that environment?
I love this. This is like the conversation between Spud and Renton in Train Spotting, except with economics. Remember the original conversation?
Which one am I?
Well, you're clearly Rent. You're Rent. I'm Spud. But it's like that idea of the Scots realising, shit, we've been conned for years.
Well, and you've conned yourself. But for me, let me clarify this, right? This is not anything that's born out of, was like us, was the bagpipes bollocks, right? It's just simply, the British economy is a joke, right? Slowly but surely it's been revealed to be a giant financial entrepot that clears euros. That might not be lasting much longer. The rest of the country is GVA negative. Everybody lives off of transfers. And the bits of the economy that make money are these rentier sectors that basically add no value, don't do innovation, and just care about sweating assets and getting fees. This is not good. You do not want to be attached to this for the long term. And if you can get out now.
When I listen to Nicola Sturgeon, she talks about Denmark, Norway, Sweden, small opening. She talks about Ireland a lot as well. But this idea that the Scots could actually just take the blueprint of Denmark and over 20 or 30 years begin to become that sort of society. A runner?
Why not? Why not? I mean, really, everybody needs a goal. It's an achievable goal. I mean, what you have in Denmark is one of the most progressive countries in the world. Something I particularly admire about it is the fact that it has a climate law that says that we've got these targets. It doesn't matter who comes to power. It doesn't matter what your political party is. It doesn't matter how you do it. You still have to meet the targets. And everybody agreed to that. So that's intergenerational positive policy making. And it's always small open economies that do this stuff for a very simple reason. You can't stick the cost somewhere else. There's nowhere else. You can't do America. You can't blame it on the minorities. You can't blame it on the Southerners. You can't blame it on the elites. You can't blame it on this, that, and the next thing. You can't divide and push the cost somewhere else. There's nowhere to put the cost. Everybody shares in the adjustment burden. So either you get it right or it hurts everybody.
Don't tell us we know all about this. And the cost of failure is very, very high. It's very, very high. But when you get it right, you can actually go through extraordinary growth periods. Let's just conclude by going back to the sort of the news and the Brexit and the no deal. What went through your head when you saw Johnson in the last 24 hours as the Prime Minister of the country that you come from still?
I know, it's truly remarkable. I mean, I just look at someone who's just an opportunist. I mean, we know the story about when he was working for The Spectator. He had two essays, one for why he was against Brexit and one for why he was for Brexit. And he was like, which one am I going to go with? You know, this is what your leadership cast is all about. We've watched the scandal after scandal where public money has gone to firms that are connected to people in the government. It's become so commonplace, it's not even worth mentioning now. When I left the United Kingdom years and years ago, the one thing you could say about it was that British people had a belief that the government was reasonably uncorrupt. I don't think you can say that now. I think that basically we have kind of Southern European levels of corruption that have creeped into the body politic. And when you get that, you get a populist response because nobody trusts the state. So when I look at Boris, I see somebody that encapsulates all of these pathologies, who for 6 years has been peddling a delusion. The delusion that the United Kingdom had the best deal of anybody in the EU. You were one of the big three. You got to write the rules. You got to veto the ones you didn't like. You had this giant financial sector that cleared all their euro transactions, did all their derivatives work, made a ton of money. You got free trading access to 60% of your markets. You literally can't have a better deal than this. And that twat David Cameron came along and says, we need to get a better deal. How do you get a better deal than the best deal ever? So for 6 years, they've been peddling this delusion that we're going to get a better deal. We're going to have dynamic alignment and this and that, and we'll have a border in the Irish Sea, which begs the question, why the hell there's an Irish border anywhere near the United Kingdom? But we'll put that to one side. All of this comes out, and it's just like juggling nonsense for 6 years, and that's where they've got to. So one last thing I'll say about the Scottish move. What also pushed me over is just looking at the polls in terms of demography. If you look at anybody under the age of 50, it's overwhelming majority. And it just gets more and more extreme the further back you go. So I look at it this way. This is priced in. This is going to happen. It's just a question of when. So if you know it's going to happen, the reasonable thing to do is to do it as well as you can.
Now, let's just talk very briefly about the path from here to there. What do you think that's going to look like?
It'll be interesting to see if Johnson allows a referendum. My money is on the term of this Parliament, no. If Labour comes back in, then you could probably get it. Or alternatively, the Tories really stop caring. One of the interesting things about this period of British government has been the whole discussion of levelling up the country. And it's quite clear when they're talking about that, the imagination stops at a line that runs from Liverpool to Sheffield.
Yes.
That's the country.
Yes.
Right? Scotland is not part of the consciousness unless we annoy them. Right? That's basically it. So in a sense, cognitively, I think that the Conservative Party is no longer the Conservative and Unionist Party. Look at the way they've treated Northern Ireland. I mean, come on, that's pretty much it. Unionism, good luck with that one, mate, right? So cognitively, I think the break's already there. So within 5 to 10 years, there will be a referendum. I think that this time it will pass. And then the question is, what are the ideas, the people, the skills, the talent, the plans that you got lying around for that contingency? That's the important work that needs to be done over the next 3 to 5 years.
And do you think the SNP are focused on that now, or do you think there's still a bit, and this is a very critical question, Mark, do you think there still might be a bit of the, as you say, the kilt and the fucking Bannockburn and all that sort of stuff? And
I'm sure, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there is. I mean, you got to remember, it's not as if I'm working as an official SNP appointee. I mean, essentially, I'm outing myself on Twitter, right? You know, I'm not heavily involved in top-level party discussions. I'm just talking about how I think about this stuff. So, you know, I'm sure that that's there. But at the same time, I don't know. It just seems to me that the whole sort of singing shortbread tins and sort of, you know, conservative unionism has just died a death.
Yes, and that was the sort of the image we had of Scotland. One image we had of Scotland was West of Scotland, the Ouija's, Rangers Celtic, all that stuff. And then the other one was that sort of very stern, as you'd say, conservative unionist Scotland, shortbread, invented kilts, all that malarkey.
Yes, all that malarkey.
And you think that's Scotland's going?
I think it's generational. I mean, I just don't see that resonating with 21st century millennial Scots. I just, you know, it didn't with me. I mean, Christ, I'm in my mid-50s and I used to hate that shit. So, you know, I just don't see, you know, that many people wrapping themselves in a giant piece of kilt and running around the streets. Maybe they do. I don't know. I don't live there. But if that's the case, then you're not going to become Denmark. You're going to become a fucking theme park.
I think I might leave it there. Mark, my man, extraordinary. Always good. I just think Scottish nationalism, I had no idea we were going there. It's the beauty of the podcast.
Neither did I. I didn't either. I mean, really.
No, but
I just outed myself on Twitter one morning and then I had to own it.
Yeah, but the great thing is, I come back to it, Mark, this is the thing, is that sovereignty is fucking liberating.
Yeah. You said it actually ages ago, and I quote you on this one. Never discount the value in being able to fuck up on your own.
Precisely. Because you learn.
Because you learn, absolutely. And if you don't have that, then, you know, I mean, it just hit me one day that sort of, you know, Britain is the world's worst UBI experiment.
UBI?
Universal Basic Income.
Oh, of course. That is, I like that one. Well,
because everybody lives off an unconditional transfer, right? That's it. That's all there is.
No, it's true. And when I hear it up north, you know, both sides in Northern Ireland, but particularly unionists. I mean, as you said, it's just a plea for the dough.
Aye, it totally is, and and it's got to be more than that. I mean, raising your children in an environment where that's the norm. Yeah. You know, how do you expect them to have any sort of like ambition or drive if the whole country is basically living on it? Literally, your country is a dole recipient. What's that all about?
Just one last question, Scotland, before we go. What is the risk that the Scottish Nats do the oil thing? They do you know what? We have some oil here.
Let's double down.
Let's double down on oil for the next 5 years. Let's bang up a massive welfare state and let's see how we go.
I guess there's always that risk, but it's funny you should mention that. So I've got a podcast out at the centre I run here at Brown University, and I just had somebody on called Thea Rio Francos, and she did this great book about Ecuador. So fascinating story about Ecuador with the Correa administration. So the left comes in and does everything that every lefty activist dreams of. We're going to rewrite the whole constitution. We're going to give land rights to the indigenous. We're going to make nature a fucking thing that has rights, right? Boom, leftiest thing ever, right? But how are they going to pay for this? Oil. So what happens is the coalition begins to fracture because basically all the indigenous people are like, this is the same shit as ever. This is conquistadors. This is 500 years of extraction. This is not what we signed up for. I think there's a way in which that's parallel to places like Scotland now. We're aware of the climate emergency. We're aware of the need for a carbon transition. And the great thing about small countries is they really can lead on this shit. In terms of global reductions, Scotland and Ireland going to zero means nothing. But in terms of the demonstration effect, it's incredibly important. And I think that basically younger Scots in particular, the ones who will full-throatedly vote for independence, are absolutely on that mission. And so I think that the idea that they could say, right now we're going to double down on carbon assets while talking a good game about being green, it's not possible. It's just too far.
Fair enough. Listen, Mark, I will see you back in this neck of the woods at some stage. As always.
You certainly will.
Always a pleasure, my man.
Dockie's happening.
Docky is happy.
Eric and I are going to do our book launch a year late.
No better place. Docky, third weekend of June 2021.
We will be there.
See you, Mark. National movement. And Brexit gives them yet another reason to disentangle from England.
Yeah.
And now Mark managed, and I thought it was very, very well done, to take that cultural yearning to be independent and also look at the failings of the British economic model, this idea of the rentier class. Fascinating stuff.
That's a really interesting angle.
I think we should get more into that sometime in the future because it is very interesting. Now, then the question is, number one, in Ireland, how much of that rentier economy do we have?
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe we park that. This are the political